Donald Trump hits back. He denies Russia has material which could be used to blackmail him, including extraordinary allegations about his conduct, both political and personal.
It's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen. And it was gotten by opponents of ours.
Also tonight, May under fire on funding. Now the head of the NHS says hospitals urgently need more cash. A teenager is charged with the killing of 7-year-old Katie Ruff. And winter is on its way. Brace yourself for thunder snow.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Looking serious, at times even shaken, Donald Trump used his first news conference in months today to denounce the explosive claims being made about his private life. He said the lurid allegations concerning prostitutes in Russia are fake news and put together by sick people. And he said the events could not have happened because, in Mr. Trump's own words, he is a germaphobe. The president-elect went even further, saying if US intelligence agencies were behind the leaked dossier, it would be a tremendous blot on their record. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore was there.
With explosive and unverified allegations swirling around him, just days before he becomes the 45th president, Donald Trump went on the attack from the very beginning, saying the news reports based on intelligence leaks are outrageous.
And I think it's a disgrace that information would be let out. I saw the information, I read the information outside of that meeting. It's all fake news, it's phony stuff. It didn't happen, and it was gotten by opponents of ours.
America's intelligence agencies are investigating a dossier compiled by a former British spy, alleging that Donald Trump, on a visit to Russia, engaged in personal behavior that has left him deeply compromised. It was a question I put directly to him. Can you make clear whether during your visits to either Moscow or St. Petersburg you engaged in conduct that you now regret, and that a reasonable observer say that you are potentially vulnerable to blackmail by Russia or by its intelligence agencies?
Let me just tell you what I do. When I leave our country, I'm a very high-profile person, would you say? I am extremely careful. I'm surrounded by bodyguards. I'm surrounded by people. And I always tell them, anywhere, but I always tell them, if I'm leaving this country, be very careful, because in your hotel rooms, and no matter where you go, you're going to probably have cameras. I'm not referring just to Russia, but I would certainly put them in that category. And number one, I hope you're going to be good anyway. But in those rooms, you have cameras in the strangest places. Cameras that are so small with modern technology, you can't see them and you won't know.
The allegations are not just about Trump's personal behavior, but also about whether he and his advisors, including his former campaign chief Paul Manafort, have long been hiding a covert political relationship with the Kremlin, including changing policy positions in return for hacked information on Hillary Clinton. Trump also ramped up his attack on his own intelligence agencies, making a startling comparison with the Third Reich.
I think it was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And I say that, and that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do. I think it's a disgrace.
It leaves the transition in turmoil.
You're fired.
An incoming president with questions being raised about his very loyalties, queries that will almost certainly follow him now into the Oval Office.
A few moments ago, I spoke to Robert, who, as you saw, had a front row seat in that press conference, and I asked him how Donald Trump was weathering those allegations.
Well, this was classic Trump, using extremely provocative language throughout that press conference. He was contemptuous of those news media organizations who are pursuing the story, withering too about what will be his principal intelligence agency, the CIA. He believes the agency is leaking information against him. by implication believing they are trying to undermine him even before his presidency has begun. And as you heard in his answer to my direct question, he is saying that there is nothing in terms of his personal behavior during his visits to Moscow that makes him vulnerable to blackmail. And he went on to say that actually if Vladimir Putin becomes a friend of his, that is very good news indeed. But plenty of ammunition there for his political opponents for sure. There was a real sense of crisis about that press conference, and none of the questions being asked inside that room are going away anytime soon.
Robert Moore speaking to me just a couple of minutes ago, and a little later in the programme we'll be reporting on President Obama's farewell speech as he prepares to hand over the presidency to his successor next week.
Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you.
That's a little bit later. But now the clamour of criticism about the state of the NHS in England and Wales has been growing all week. And it reached fever pitch today. Theresa May came under fire from Jeremy Corbyn in the Commons, followed by an all-day debate on the crisis. Doctors' organisations gave dire warnings, and this afternoon the boss of NHS England told MPs investment is desperately needed. Here's our health editor, Rachel Younger.
You know that feeling when it never seems to stop, when they just keep on coming? It's been like that for months in our A&Es. Today, there was a dose of the same medicine for the Prime Minister, with critics lining up to tell her something has to give.
Earlier this week, the Prime Minister said she wanted to create a shared society. Well, we've certainly got that. More people sharing hospital corridors on trolleys. More people sharing waiting areas at A&E departments.
Jeremy Corbyn quoted the doctors who today claim the NHS was underfunded and overstretched. The Prime Minister, flanked by two of the Brexit campaigners who'd promised the NHS millions, didn't sound overly worried.
I accept there have been a small number of incidents where where unacceptable practices have taken place.
The Prime Minister will have had easier mornings, but the real pain was still to come. Her claim the government had coughed up more than the NHS had asked for, torn apart by the very man who runs it.
Like probably every part of the public service, we got less than we asked for in that process. And so I think it would be stretching it to say that the NHS has got more than it has asked for.
And this is what's pushed his trademark loyalty to the limit. Hospitals that just can't cope, patients shorn of their dignity. This was Blackburn last week. Today, at London's Chelsea and Westminster, there isn't a single bed spare. They're stretched to the limit.
Everybody has to be working at their absolute maximum for us to be able to even reach where we are now, let alone what's going to happen in the future. As you know, we're about to hit a flu season. The flu season's only just starting, and that's only going to bump our numbers up even further.
And how do you cope with that when you're already running at over 100% occupancy?
That's an interesting question.
And it's one faced across the country.
Not since the 4-hour waiting standard was first introduced have so many patients found themselves having to wait for much longer. Despite the Herculean efforts of NHS staff, last month's figures were the worst they've ever been. And since then, hospitals like this one have come under even more intense pressure.
The government has ring-fenced the NHS budget, and what a difficult economic times. The reality is that may have to be enough. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
Well, let's go to our political correspondent Libby Wiener now. Now, Libby, how difficult is it going to be for Mrs May to ignore what Simon Stevens had to say to MPs today?
Well, quite difficult, I'd say. I've seen Simon Stevens give evidence to MPs before. I've interviewed him before, and he's always been extremely diplomatic, but not today. He let rip, effectively undermining the Prime Minister's claim that the NHS is getting more money than it has asked for in the past, and perhaps most worryingly of all, saying that the money is running out. Spending will be down in real terms from 2018. The most dramatic part of his evidence perhaps was when he brandished a copy of the Daily Mail which showed how little Britain spends on health compared to other countries, 30% less than Germany, he said. Why is he so angry? Well, perhaps another front page might explain that. This in the Times today, a newspaper article which suggested that number 10 aides close to Mrs. May had actually blamed him for the crisis, that it was the problems created by hospitals themselves which were causing further problems for patients. Now, having picked off one of her civil servants, her top civil servant in Brussels 2 weeks ago, it seems very unfortunate, ill-judged perhaps, for her to have taken on Sir Simon Stevens, the man in charge of NHS England. He showed today that he was more than a match for her.
Libby Vina in Downing Street, thank you. Paramedics were called to a court in Wales this morning when a convicted sex offender cut his own throat in the dock. Łukasz Pawlowski was waiting to be sentenced at Haverfordwest Magistrates Court, having previously pleaded guilty to sexual assault. He was airlifted to hospital with serious injuries. A girl of just 15 years old was remanded into secure accommodation today, charged with the murder of a younger girl. 7-year-old Katie Ruff died after being found in a field with cuts to her neck and chest. Neil Connery reports from York.
Members of Katie Ruff's family supporting each other through the most painful of ordeals. Her grandparents among them, as they came to York magistrates this morning as proceedings against a 15-year-old girl charged with her murder began. Katie, who was 7, was found seriously injured near a playing field on Monday and died later in hospital. The girl charged with her murder, who can't be named for legal reasons, is also charged with possession of an offensive weapon. The girl, who was flanked by 2 security guards and a youth offending team manager, said nothing during the 8-minute hearing. She was remanded into secure accommodation and will now appear at Leeds Crown Court on Friday. Today, at the scene, as investigations continue, the community remains in deep shock.
People just so amazed that such a thing could happen, that such a beautiful little girl whose life was so full of hope and promise could be so tragically cut short.
As flowers continue to be laid, Katie's father has said the family are devastated by her loss. Neil Connery, ITV News, York.
Now, power cuts, high winds, road closures, and now apparently even the prospect of something called thunder snow. Winter has finally arrived with a vengeance, sweeping in across Scotland and the north of England. Damon Green reports from the weather front line.
One of the main arteries into Edinburgh blocked by a truck blown over in gale force winds. The Forth Road Bridge shut in both directions all day, causing traffic chaos around the city. The single greatest impact of the high winds which have battered the northeast of Scotland and England. The bridge closed to high-sided vehicles at the time, efforts to recover the truck hampered by high winds. And there's more to come. Forecasters predict the arrival of a belt of icy weather over the next 24 hours, bringing ice and snow to Scotland as well as northwest and southwest England. A number of weather warnings are in place. Today's gusts, with some recorded at over 70 miles an hour, came as a shock to some. One of Newcastle's busiest shopping streets had to be closed because of construction debris blowing from the roofs. In Yorkshire and further north, the threat of falling trees, hundreds of homes without power and hazardous driving conditions. This road in Gateshead barred by a stable blown into the middle of it.
At one point I did think, oh God, I hope those stables don't blow away, but I didn't actually think they would. I went to work and then got a phone call from my mum saying the stables had blocked the road off and the police were holding the road.
Whether or not the country will see this phenomenon, known as thunder snow, predicted by some, the north will have to be braced for the worst.
Well, Newgate Street here in Newcastle remains closed and could be closed for 3 days. Further north from here, the Forth Road Bridge closures there remain in place tonight. Forecasters hedging their bets about what exactly is going to happen tomorrow. What seems certain, though, is that the worst of the snow will hit the northwest of England and Scotland around mid-morning. Some doubt as to how far south that snow will extend. People will have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Damon Green in Newcastle, thank you. Still to come on the ITV Evening News, scientists make an exciting new discovery, a new species of gibbon. But what is the Star Wars connection? We can find out the answer to that and the rest of the day's news after the break. Join me then. Welcome back. His successor may be mired in hotly disputed allegations, but Barack Obama's farewell presidential speech did not allude to the troubles of Donald Trump. Yes, there were references, possibly pointed, to his own record of delivering a fair, just, inclusive America, but the speech in his home city of Chicago, where, as he said, it all started, was an emotional tribute to his country and his family. Martin Geisler was there.
For his final farewell, Barack Obama went back to where it all began. He loves Chicago, and his adopted hometown loves him back. His time in office, he said, hadn't been easy, but he looks back now with pride.
If I had told you 8 years ago that America would reverse a Great Recession, reboot our auto industry, shut down Iran's nuclear weapons program without firing a shot, take out the mastermind of 9/11, you might have said our sights were set a little too high.
He barely mentioned Donald Trump by name, but he did call on people to step up if the going gets tough.
If you're disappointed by your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself.
It hadn't been an emotional speech, but then the president turned his attention to the woman who made this journey with him.
You took on a role you didn't ask for, and you made it your own, with grace and with grit and with style and good humor.
The first family joined the president on stage, and together they bid the country goodbye.
You can feel the adoration for President Obama in this room. He is always impressive at events like this. But America must now prepare to bid farewell to Obama, the orator, and prepare to welcome a new president whose method of communication and whose message could not be more different.
Whatever comes next, Obama's supporters insist his legacy will live on.
Do you feel better about the future after hearing him tonight?
Yes, I do, because I know that it does not matter who's in that office. What matters is that we love each other as a people, and we remain united as one.
I'm elated and a little depressed, because I don't think we'll see anyone like this in our lifetimes again.
Barack Obama came into power preaching a mantra of hope. 8 years on, as he leaves office, the message remains the same. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Chicago.
Here, the details of another wave of sex charges against Rolf Harris are both shocking and squalid. A court heard claims today that a blind and disabled woman and a 12-year-old girl were among those assaulted in public by the entertainer. Harris denies the charges. Rebecca Barry has been in court. So, Rebecca, what was said?
Well, the prosecution claimed that all of the offences took place in public and invited the jury to consider whether it was Rolf Harris's celebrity status that made him so brazen. He's accused of assaulting 7 women and girls between 1971 and 2004. One of the alleged victims was just 12 years old and had asked Rolf Harris for his autograph. Another is a blind, disabled woman who was allegedly assaulted at Moorfields Eye Hospital. And it's claimed that a 13-year-old girl was attacked after an episode of Saturday Superstore at BBC Television Centre. The prosecution said that for 50 years Rolf Harris was a musician, artist and entertainer of international standing, but then reminded the jury that in 2014 he was convicted on 12 counts of indecent assault. And all of the women in this case only came forward after the publicity from that original trial. Rolf Harris, who's 86, is not actually here in court in person because of his age and ill health. He's appearing via video link from prison. He denies all of the charges and the trial is set to last 6 weeks.
Rebecca Barry in Southwark, thank you. Prince William made a rare public admission today about how he was affected by the death of his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. On a visit with the Duchess of Cambridge to a bereavement centre in London, he comforted a grieving girl by telling her how he felt very angry when his mother died. This year will mark the 20th anniversary of Diana's death. And petrol prices in the UK have hit their highest level in more than 2 years. The cost of a litre of petrol reached an average of £1.18 on Monday, the highest since December 2014. Finally, you may have thought Luke Skywalker's closest furry friend was Chewbacca. It turns out you might be wrong. Here's our science correspondent Alok Jha on the discovery in China of nature's newest Star Wars connection.
Swinging through the trees of the Gaoligong Mountains of southwest China, a new species of ape, a type of gibbon that scientists say is distinct from the two already known in the area. This gibbon has been known to exist for some time, but new studies of its genetics, the patterns on its coat and the shape of its teeth have led to calls to specify this animal as a new species.
I think it just shows you really how little we still know about what's going on in the wild in all these different amazing countries. If we're still finding out about new species of big animals like gibbons, quite obvious animals to people that people can recognise, it just, to me, highlights how little we know and actually what other species are out there.
The scientists who describe it get to name it. They've chosen to take inspiration from a famous Jedi Knight. So meet the Skywalker Hulock gibbon, a name that reflects the high treetops in which the creatures live. The discovery isn't without a tinge of sadness though. There are only a few hundred of these gibbons left in the wild, only just identified, already endangered. Alok Jha, ITV News.
And that's all for now. Tom Bradby's here later with news at 10, but from me and all the evening news team, have a great evening. Bye-bye.